Congratulations on your recent release of the new album. I've been listening to it all week.
Really?
Yeah. Was it harder to do this album than the last one?
Actually, yeah. The last album was came so naturally. It was I feel like we were, if anything, kind of lazy because we were so, it just was boom, 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 and we just were making everything. And then with this one, it was a big challenge. We were very stuck, in terms of inspiration and feeling like we were good. And that was really scary. And I thought we would not make an album. I genuinely didn't. When we started and even in the middle, I was like, this isn't going to work out. And then it ended up being my best album. And I feel really proud of it.
Yeah, it's a great album. I was actually watching an interview and you were talking about the creative process and how this one was different than the last one because you were making this comparison between fear and fart, something like that, no? And you talked about the last album was more like a fartsy vibe,
yes.
And this one was more of a fear vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. Out of context, it sounds so funny.
Yeah, but you were talking about this concept of smelling your own farts, no? And that this one was more from a fear perspective. Is that the right thing to say?
Yeah, I think it was just a very doubtful place. This album was. We just were very uncertain and felt like we weren't. It was more like we didn't have proof that we could still do it because the last album we made, I was 18 and it was, we were kind of different people than we are now. And I just was really nervous that I didn't have it anymore. And Phineas and we had a lot of really intense conversations where we were kind of okay, let's be realistic here. Can we even do this still? And there was genuinely a period of time when I was no, we aren't going to be able to, and this isn't going to work out. And I don't know what we're going to do because everybody is expecting us to make this album, and I don't know if we even can. And that was scary, and we just kind of pushed through it and didn't worry too much about it. We kind of would start to and then be like, you know what? We don't have to think that hard about it. It is what it is, and we'll figure it out. And we just kind of pushed through that and eventually kind of cracked the code and just broke through that door and ended up making something we love so much.
And creatively, did the process change? Because I also heard that you didn't have finished songs until a couple of months in. So I guess that is scary, right?
I mean, that was part of why it was so scary, was that we usually, the way we've always made music, not even just one time, the way we have always done it, which was different than any time before that we, for this album, than how we've always done it. We've always, made song by song. It's one at a time kind of. And we, maybe we stop being super inspired for one of them and then we move on and come back to it. But for the most part, we hone in on one song at a time-ish and then work on it until it's done and then move on to the next one. And, at the end, we go back in and do some little last finishing touches. But in general, when you do that, then you have a song and then you have another song, you have another song. So you have proof that you're making music and you're oh, I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it and it's happening and it'll get done eventually because I can see that I'm doing it. And with this album, we didn't do that at all. We worked on pieces of everything at one time, kind of, back to back, and then we would put it away as soon as the light would dim, and then we would get something else out, and then as soon as we'd get a little faded, we'd put something out. It was really crazy, but then it was really frustrating because then we never had a song, and we had pieces of a bunch of songs, but we never had a full song. So we kind of had this feeling and this fear of, we haven't even made one song, how are we going to make 10?
Yeah.
And then we just kept doing that, and eventually they turned into 10 full songs. And what was amazing about it was then we had 10 songs that were made kind of at the same time. So none of them felt old and none of them felt really new, and they just all felt like they grew at the exact same time, and they all felt kind of none of them had aged. And because sometimes you work on an album and one of the songs is 2 years old and one of them is a week old, and that's really weird and confusing. So it was really rewarding in that way, but it was a challenge.
And do you think that sonically that made a difference? Because I really like your music because I saw you at Coachella a couple of years ago, And what I find really interesting about your music is that it sounds really intimate, but it's like in a big arena or in a big stage. And I was actually watching an interview with your brother that was in his childhood home, and that kind of like explained to me a lot about why it sounded that way, because it's an intimate space.
Yes.
Now that you both evolved, you're really big artists.